Hello, everyone. This is Kirill Soloviev from Content Quo. Many thanks for coming. And you've made it to the webinar about 7 signs that your linguistic quality program could use an upgrade. I'm giving you all some time to join, and we'll start very shortly. I hope you're all doing great today. You definitely look good. Just kidding, I can't really see you. Okay. Maybe we'll give it a bit of time and we will start shortly. Thank you for joining. For those of you who joined later, my name is Kirill. You're definitely at the right place if you made it so far. Just waiting for a couple more people to join us and we will begin. All right. By the way, we will be making some good use of the Q&A feature and the chat feature today at this webinar. So please make sure you know where to find it. And we'll talk about it a bit more in just a second. We're almost ready to go. By the way, this is being recorded, so if you need to drop off early, no worries. So if you will be watching this later on, no worries as well. You will be able to get the entire content that you came here for. All right, the people are coming, but it's time to get started. Hello, everyone. Once again, my name is Kirill Soloviev, and welcome to this live webinar on 7 signs that your linguistic quality program could use an upgrade. So let me briefly walk you through how this will actually go today. So first, just to make sure that you are at the right place, who is this webinar for? This webinar is mostly for localization teams at what we call the translation buyer side. But if you're actually an LSP, don't despair. If you really want to run linguistic quality programs for your clients, or maybe if you're already running them, it might be useful for you as well. What kind of stage will we focus on today? Maybe you have already started some kind of a quality program, you have something in place, or maybe you're just thinking to do so, but are not quite sure yet. Either of those, I do hope to share useful insights with all of you today. In terms of the flow, this is scheduled for roughly 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll go into actually tackling your questions live. So we'll look first at why localization teams rely on linguistic quality programs at all. If you don't have anything like that yet, that might be interesting. We'll spend the biggest part of our talk today to look at different symptoms that you might need to have a formal linguistic quality program, or that you might need to work further on improving it or improve it faster. And finally, I will share several strategies on how to start addressing some of the symptoms we'll focus on today. Before we start, though, just a couple of words about myself. My name is Kirill Soloviev. I am the co-founder and CEO of Content Quo, and we'll talk about the company very briefly in just a second. I've been in this industry for over 18 years right now, so some of you might have already met me before. If yes, I'm very glad to see you. If not, I will just share a couple of things about what I have been doing all those 18 years. I did quite a bit of travel, especially lately. You might have seen me popping up at different conferences like Taos and Lockworld and whatnot, mostly in Europe, but also a little bit in Asia and in the States as well. So traveling is definitely a big part of my life, or it was. before 2020 and the pandemic has hit. I actually do other things in my spare time, believe it or not. I like digital photography, especially black and white. I do go out on bike rides when the weather allows that. It doesn't happen that often because I'm here in the northeastern corner of Europe in Tallinn, Estonia, and it's kind of difficult to bike throughout the year, but I do that when I can. Over the weekends, I also love to hang out with really smart and creative technology people on hackathons. So helping them build exciting prototypes for new software solutions to some wicked problems. I've done my share of public speaking and conference presentations as well. And I also like to play different kinds of musical instruments, most of them quite badly, to be honest. So that's me. Now, what about the company? What about Content Quo? We are a technology company headquartered right here in the fabulous medieval Tallinn. We've started 5 years ago with my co-founder, Alexander, on a simple mission. We've both been in this industry for a long while and have been struggling with lack of transparency around translation quality and localization quality and linguistic quality. And we didn't have anything better to do other than to actually launch a startup and start building software to fix it. It's been quite a ride since the time that we've launched in 2018. Very fortunate to have worked with some of the smartest localization quality managers, and we've picked up quite a lot of insights from them, some of which I'm actually going to share today. So let's get started. But first, let's briefly talk about you. I also want to know who is on this webinar today. Very briefly, use the chat window if you can, and let me know. Are you on the buyer side or on the LSP side? And what's your role? What stage is your quality program currently in? Is it early stage? Is it mid stage? Or is it late stage? And super brief, what's your biggest pain point with linguistic quality in your organization or in your company? If you could just use the chat window and type a few things out, it would be amazing. And I will give you a bit of time to do that. If you can't find the chat button, you might need to click the More button in Zoom first, which is hidden under the 3 dots menu, and then you might be able to go into the chat. So yeah, super briefly, your role, the stage, like how far along with managing linguistic quality you are today, early, mid, or late, very mature program. And if there's anything in particular that bothers you, let me know. I would love to tailor this to your needs a bit better if I can. We won't have time to do this in full, but I will try my best to make it as relevant for you as I can. But yeah, thank you for answers. It's great to see that. Just to clarify, when I say program, I don't mean software. I'm talking about the process and the approach and methodology and everything that goes around it. So not that program, not the software type of program, but rather the solution or the process type of program. Cool. Early stage, not very easy to use, and so on and so forth. Yeah, any other thoughts? Please keep them coming into the chat window, and I'll start moving along with some of the ideas I wanted to share today. First, why are we talking about linguistic quality? When I was trying to come up with a headline for this slide, I thought about quality essentially being invisible to most, especially outside the localization industry, unless it's really bad. Have any of you heard about the recent Amazon launch in Sweden? If it's a yes, just type that into the chat window. I'll talk about it shortly, but I'm curious how many of you have actually seen that piece of news. I think it happened last week. Yes, yes. Okay, cool. So yeah, for those of you who don't know exactly what's been going on, basically Amazon has rolled out its online e-commerce store in Sweden in the Swedish language, of course, and they faced certain challenges with how the names of certain items have been localized by apparently their machine translation engine. So this is usually the only situation when linguistic quality makes the news. And the Amazon case is fascinating, knowing how much work and how much processes and how many team members in Amazon actually work in localization. But let's not focus on that too much. But basically, that's how everybody knows, right? When something goes wrong. Now, when I say a linguistic quality program, what do I actually mean by that? Again, I'm not going to teach you everything that I know, but just super briefly, this is when you inspect the quality of your translations, usually at regular intervals, and gather data about how good or bad they are. Might look something like this. A bunch of metrics. You can use this kind of programs to look at your machine translation engines. You can look at how your in-house translators perform. You can look at how your translation vendors or LSPs perform, right? The crux of it is being data-driven, not opinion-driven, but actually trying to gather some useful KPIs about the quality of your translation from the linguistic standpoint, right? Now, in terms of benefits, why the teams I've seen and the teams I've worked at back in my old localization director days, I used to run a program like that as well. Why do they do that most commonly? Number one, just really figuring out what the hell are my translations like. Let's face it, once you go beyond a certain scope of languages, it's very difficult to really know how good or bad your localized content really is. So the first reason why teams put this kind of program in place is to get transparency. What am I actually shipping to the customers, to the users, and to the partners of my company, the company I'm driving localization for? Number two, very useful thing. Once you have regular flow of data about your linguistic quality, you can actually use it to make your translations better, to continuous improvement kind of thing. And of course, feedback is the central element to that. Yes, you need to know how good or bad things are, but the sheer act of measuring something, as you might know, often helps it improve. So yeah, being able to achieve continuous improvement in the quality of your localized content is another popular reason why teams put this kind of programs in place. Managing downwards to your vendors, to your in-house linguists, to your individual freelancers, whatever your supply chain is, doesn't really matter. The principle is always the same. Last but not the least, you don't only have your own supply chain to manage, right? Not just your team, not just your LSPs, but sometimes other people in your company might be interested to know how good is localization doing. Management teams and executive teams usually speak the language of data really well. And if you can speak the same language to them and explain something interesting about your localized content, chances are you can actually move faster and achieve the change you want to push for. So managing upwards is another important reason. Of course, this approach has its limitations when you use quality. I'm not going to talk about this today, but in general, this is a direction. This is where data-driven really helps. At least it did help me back in my career. I wish I did more of that. Question to you. Any of those reasons seem compelling to you? Or maybe you had your own rationale for starting your existing quality program some time ago. If so, what was the main driver out of those three? Or maybe you had another one. Why did you think it's compelling? Or why are you thinking to start a program like that? Use the chat window, just type a few words, hit the send button. why are you thinking about a linguistic quality program, or why did you decide to put one in place if you already have it running? Oops, I was too early. I'll need to go back for a sec. Sorry about that. Continuous improvement, that's great. Anything else? Any other drivers you had for implementing like a data-driven program, or why would you consider to do that? What's the rationale that seems to drive you? Monitoring and controlling. Yes, honestly, when I was a localization director back in the day, I really hated not being in control. I was a bit of a control freak myself. It just the sheer knowledge of not being able to be sure that my team is doing a great job was driving me nuts. I wanted to be in control. Yeah, knowing if languages I do not speak have actually good quality or not. Exactly, right? No way of finding out. So you need to do something to be able to sleep at night, especially when the number of languages grow. So this is a major pain point. Now, let's start moving deeper into this direction. 7 signs of problems that I have seen that might allow you to figure out that you need to start thinking about a linguistic quality program you don't have today, so putting it in place, or maybe about improving your existing program and getting the most out of it. I'll talk about 7. Of course, there are many more, but we need to start somewhere, right? So, number 1, or symptom number 1. Have you ever had this feeling, especially if you're new to the job? I know some of you have recently joined their current companies, where you are bombarded from all sides of the company, internally and externally, by bad feedback about your localization. I know because I have been there myself. When I joined my last localization bureau, Japanese was a major problem. If you feel the same, do let me know in chat as well. But I think Japanese is always a major pain point in terms of quality. So yeah, just starting to have things dropping onto your desk where you need to act, but you don't know exactly how to do that is definitely an early warning that you might need to be thinking about a formal linguistic quality management program that is based on data. Like, the reason for that is simple. If you're getting negative feedback, it's already too late. You should have done something before the feedback lands on your desk, right? If it's still there, then yeah, maybe it's time to start considering proactive measures. Number 2, at Content Quo, by the way, we see number 2 a lot. So this is the opposite of number 1. Having no clue about the quality of your translations. And I think some of you have mentioned this in the chat. One caveat, what I've noticed is that oftentimes you have your high priority languages, what we call tier 1 localization, where you might have some idea, right? Maybe you speak the languages yourself. Maybe you have team members that can cover them, that can give you a clue, right? Even before you have a formal program in place. So, but anything that happens beyond tier 1 is terra incognita. You have no clue. And what you're doing, you're basically sitting there and contemplating, am I getting bad feedback on this language this month or not? And if you don't get it, it doesn't mean you're lucky. It basically means that people are just too lazy to tell you that things are bad, but it doesn't mean that there's no need to do anything about it. Any of you here facing number 2, I find that this is extremely common, actually, just simply not having enough information about the work that we're doing in localization. Is it good or not? If you face number 2, just type 2 in the chat, or type yes. Yeah, okay. Yes, I know. I've been there myself. I used to have like the top 3 languages for my old company covered. I had linguists for Japanese, German, and Russian, which were the top tier languages for that company back in the day. But anything beyond that was very difficult to see through. So yeah, like I said, for me, this was super frustrating. Number 3. Oh, I love that one. I've been guilty as charged with this. This is when you start to bring up the topic of the quality of your translations to your management team, but they just give you a blank stare, just like this lady here. What are you talking about? I don't understand. What do you mean the quality of translation? Can it be of different quality? Aren't we paying for premium translation every single time? Please explain that to me. I've had a bit of that in the past, but yeah, the thing is, even among us inside the industry, we cannot really agree of what quality of localization or linguistic quality really means. So chances of explaining it to the outside world without resorting to some kind of data are tiny, just like that. So yeah, it's a difficult place to be in, especially when you already feel you need to change, but you cannot justify this to the management team. Number 4. This happens a bit further along the progress of rolling out the linguistic quality program. This is I'll tell you my story from back in the day, how number 4 went for me. So I used to purchase localization services with a significant budget back in the day. I used to be this localization director for a software company. And at some point, we've engaged some of the best LSPs in the industry. I know some of you must work with them today. They're still around and doing great. And the part of the package they offered was actually checking 10% of all the translation volume that we gave to them and passing it through a formal linguistic quality assessment, and then sharing the data with me and with my team, with the team members who were in charge of quality and vendors and the like. This is a very common setup in the high end of the translation services. So maybe you have something like that, or maybe you find you have to resort to this. But my problem was that over time, I was very happy at first that I'm getting some structured data on my language quality, but over time, I actually grew very weary of this process. Why? Because for every tiny little thing, for every tiny little question that I wanted to answer, like figuring out the direction, do we spend more on this language? Do we spend less? Do we work harder, or can we relax a bit? For every tiny question like that, my team actually had to go back to my LSP and extort the data from them, and they would only give it to us once per month. Why? Not because they are greedy, but because the infrastructure and the processes they run were just not built for answering questions quickly. So yeah, especially if you're in a smaller and agile team, or a continuous localization process, like this can be super frustrating. So at Content Quo, we talk to teams who do continuous localization, and that's what they say. Oh, but like it's a very slow moving. I can't fit a linguistic quality program into my process. Usually that's because the way that the vendor is trying to put this together for you is kind of wrong. So yeah, that's how it manifests itself. Number 5. My favorite one. When we onboard new customers at Content Quo, this is super frequent, so maybe you are guilty of that too. I was talking to a localization manager the other week, and they are at an early stage of their quality program. So we talked about like how to shape it and basically how to run things before they commit to something specific and start to scale. And one thing that stuck is like they told me this, like we are thinking to check the quality of our translations once per quarter. Once per quarter, right? That's 4 times per year. Now, let's think about that for a second. We are still talking about translation, right? Human language text, maybe creative, maybe not creative, but it's still not formalized. Like, all the methods in the universe that currently exist for assessing the quality of your translations are kind of subjective because they rely on human judgments or proxies for human judgments. So how far along on the objectivity axis do you think you can get if you only check it 4 times per year? Like, do you think that's enough to actually gather solid statistic evidence about how the quality of your translations is changing? Like, does 4 data points actually give you, statistics? Like, is it real stuff, or are we kind of deluding ourselves? I wonder what your position on that is. Like, type it into the chat. Like, do you believe that 4 data points per year is enough to get a solid grasp on how good or bad your translations are, especially if you're translating like daily? I'm curious. What do you think? 4 data points enough, or maybe we need a bit more than that? Just type into the chat window. It depends. Well, yeah, I agree. If you only do 4 translation projects per year, absolutely 4 assessments kind of covers it very nicely, and you're hitting like 100% of your projects. Might work. Generally speaking, no. Yeah, generally speaking, I would agree. Any other opinions? Yeah, all right, keep them coming. I'll tell you what I believe, right? What we at Content Quo believe. Like, anything that is below at least 5 data points per month is kind of bordering on pseudo statistics, to be honest, just because how this whole process is laid up and what kind of methods we use to find out and measure the quality of our translation. Your mileage may vary. We work with some organizations that do dozens of assessments per day, and they need to do that because their volumes are quite significant. So at that point, yeah, pseudo statistics finally stop. But let's move on. I still have 2 other things as we progress along the maturity of your linguistic quality program. This is, of course, my favorite one. Once you actually ramp something up, once you start to do some kind of measurements of your translation quality on hopefully some kind of regular basis, now, this is what sometimes happens. If you see that, think about it, maybe there's a better way to do it. So in order to run this process continuously and repeatedly, what happens is, like, at some point, those pesky Excel spreadsheets pop up, and you need to enter the data there. You need to collect the feedback there. You crunch the numbers there, and you send them by email from party to party. And this goes on from your team down to your LSP, down to their LSP, down to LSP of their LSP, down to the individual freelancers, and then back again into the supply chain and inside your team. Basically, this goes on forever. And at each point, you're actually wasting highly paid time of your internal and external team members just basically to send files around. Sounds stupid, right? Well, I've seen incredibly advanced teams in all other aspects of automation, their translation flow, that still do that. So if you got to this point where you actually have some kind of a program running, ask yourself, maybe this is one of the symptoms that you need to pay attention to. At Content Quo, we see this all the time, basically. And the last one. This is the most difficult. This is for the late stage linguistic quality programs among us. This is when you already have done an amazing amount of work to start getting the ball rolling. You're gathering data by the boatload, but you still don't understand what's happening. I think there is some kind of widespread misconception that we basically need to just start gathering the data and then the insights magically flock into our amazingly bright heads, right? Well, no, this doesn't work this way. I often see teams that actually collect lots of translation quality results, data points, metrics, but Yeah, they still have no clue why things are going the way they're going, or even don't know which way their translations are going for different languages, for different product lines, for different suppliers, for different production processes like MT versus human translation, and so on and so forth. So this is really the biggest pain, the way I see it, because if you got so far, you actually expected to bring you real insights, and in many cases it still does not. So yeah, these are the 7 symptoms, maybe from the earliest stages of the programs that we've seen to maybe the latest stages that we've seen. Before we go into ideas on how to start working around them, I want to ask you a question. So out of those 7, what's like the pain point that appeals to you the most? What's the symptom that you feel you might be facing right now? You just type in the number into the chat. So I'll go through them super quick. So number 7 was having data but no insights. Number 6 was spending and wasting a lot of time on your Excel-based and email-based process. Number 5, pseudo-statistics, not having enough data to make reasonable conclusions. Number 4, having to rely on your LSP or on your suppliers for everything in regards to quality. Number 3, not being able to explain the quality problem to the management team. Number 2, just not having a clue about quality at all, apart maybe from the most frequent, most important languages. And number 1, a ton of negative or just unclear feedback that your translations might be bad. Let me know how it looks like for you, and I'll give you a bit of time to respond, and we'll get back to my suggestions. Ooh, the chat window is very active. 6, 7, 6, 2, 4, 1, 6. Yeah, number 6 is a clear winner. I know, it's so weird. When I've started in this industry, working as part of localization quality programs in 2005, I think, we were using Excel spreadsheets. When I started this company in 2015, companies were still using Excel spreadsheets, and guess what? It's 2020, and we still haven't been able to replace all of the Excel spreadsheets yet, but we're getting there. Thanks for sharing how you feel. Now, I know this can all be incredibly frustrating. I want to offer some ideas on how to solve things. There's a bit of a trick. Like the symptoms repeat many times over, like they are shared. The solutions to those symptoms are maybe a bit more individual for each organization, for each company, for each localization team. I'm sorry, I cannot really give each of you a silver bullet today. I will give instead some general recommendations of what to focus on for different stages of your program: early stage, mid stage, and late stage. Right? If you want to drill down into more details, we can always schedule a call. You'll tell me about your specific situation, and I'll be very happy to offer some suggestions on how to go about them right now, specifically for you. We do this at Content Qual very frequently. It's completely free, so I'm very happy to share what we've picked up over the years. And I'll give you a link to our website later on where you could schedule a call with us. Now, suggestions on where to go from there. And by the way, if you feel a particular aspect of those things is something you want to dig into, feel free to send a question into the Q&A window. Ideally, you go to the Q&A window so that I can see it easily and don't lose it into the chat. So if you want to talk about one specific aspect, we will have time for Q&A. And I'm almost done. After this section, we can actually look at your questions. And listening to the answers is also useful as well. I know that many challenges are shared, and sometimes what works for one company might work for another. Now, early stage linguistic quality programs. Basically, you know you need to do something, but you're not quite sure how to go about it. So we call the stage the shaping stage. It's like a pottery. A pottery making process. Have any of you guys have actually made any pottery with your hands? Type yes in the chat if you've done. I have never done pottery myself, but one of my in-laws actually is great at that. So I've seen the type of work she's doing. Fascinating stuff. Like it's basically taking something very soft and intangible, and then with your hands, like you give it some very definite form, and then you make sure that it keeps that form. So early stage quality programs are exactly like pottery, right? You need to move very carefully in order to give it the right shape, because if you don't, it will break down later on. A bit of a challenge. Now, what to think about? Number one is methodology. How are we going to measure the quality of our translations? Which way are we going to use to what data are we going to collect about the linguistic quality of the work that's done in your localization program? A bunch of options in there. You have the analytical approaches like TAOS, DQF, and so on and so forth. You have the holistic approaches like adequacy, fluency, which can be used for machine translation. You have hybrid approaches. You have tons of ways of defining those precisely. So lots of things to factor into the decision-making process. Next one, cadence. How frequently are you going to look at your translation? So how many data points do you want to get in order to make better decisions about your translation quality? Not an easy answer, of course. It depends is the best way to respond to the cadence question. But this is really the cornerstone, the crux of the decision. You know what data to gather. Now you need to decide how frequently you actually will do that. Next one, topic 3, scope. So what are you actually going to measure? Which content will go through the quality assessment process and which content will not? How do you decide out of your entire localization program company-wide what's worth spending effort and time on inspecting and what might be completely okay? How do you assess the risk of poor quality before you actually decide to invest into checking it and gathering data? So this is the scoping question. Last but not the least, resourcing. So let's face it, in order to figure out the quality of translation in detail, you need a human expert. There's no way around it, even though machine learning technology is kind of getting there, but it's still at best a supportive measure. Now, what people will actually gather those quality metrics for you? Will it be in-house team members, in-house linguists, or in-country personnel, perhaps, maybe? Will it be dedicated freelance linguists that you contract on a long-term basis? Will you engage your LSP into that? Or will you engage the same LSP as you use today? Or maybe you work with a dedicated LSP just to provide you insights on the quality of your translation. So a bunch of specialized companies, some of which we at Content Quo do work with regularly, that can do that. But there are, of course, many other ways to gather the metrics. And of course, all the big LSPs are experts at running this kind of program. So you have many ways of resourcing your linguistic quality program. And at Content Quo, we often help teams make decisions at this early stage. What's the best that they can do in order to resource? When you sum it all together, it all comes down into the budget you need to allocate for your program. It's not free to measure the quality of your translations regularly. Far from it. It's actually quite expensive. You need to make sure you can secure the required investment for running all those wonderful things and for getting the transparency that you know you want to have and you know that you deserve. I'll talk about this one. Question. Any of the things you already thought about, you that are at the early stage of program, what's the biggest concern out of methodology, cadence, scope, resourcing, or maybe something else, right? Type this into the chat window, or maybe even in the Q&A if you have a specific question you want me to answer, and I'll try to make my best suggestions. So for the early stage, actually, let me go back to the previous slide. Of course, these are not all the considerations you need to cover when designing a program, but some of the more important ones. Methodology, yeah, I agree. There's so many options. Earlier, just before this call, I was actually talking to one of the quality managers at Google, and we spent 45 minutes figuring out ideas about methodology for evaluating a certain type of a localization production process and how to make the best use of the available methodologies on the market and how to combine them for their needs. So yeah, methodology is tricky. Anything else bothering you at early stage programs besides methodology? Resources. Yeah, I know this is tricky. There are a bunch of options. I used to run like a very hybrid quality program back in my day when I was managing localization. I had a mix of in-house linguists, dedicated freelancers, and LSPs working together on different parts of my quality program. It was messy, but yeah, I can confidently say I've done it all and have some room for benchmarking. So if you decide to schedule a free consultation with me, I'll be happy to share what I know works and what doesn't work, again, depending on your specific circumstances. Keep them coming. Post stuff into Q&A if you want me to go into more detail. I'll look at the next stage. Scaling. This is when you've laid the foundation for how you will gather the data, what data we will gather, how frequently you will gather, who will actually do that, and so on and so forth. So this is the kind of the most critical stage. Now, you know what you want to do. You're ready to go. Now you need to start executing. That's the mid stage or the scaling stage. At ContentQual, we work a lot with teams at this stage because they usually realize they've started to hit walls. They need better solutions to move forward. So typical considerations to solve are as follows. Now, number one, we know what we want to do. How can we do this with the highest possible efficiency? How can we reduce the overhead? How can we remove the waste from our linguistic quality assessment and data analysis processes, right? So lowering overhead is like the mantra at the scaling stage. The less overhead you have, the more you can dedicate to the core of the process, which is still in 2020, let's face it, having translators, linguistic experts, look at your translation and give structured, objective, well-defined feedback. Either for other translation teams who produce this translation, or maybe for the benefit of your machine translation team, if the goal of your program is to improve the MT quality. Second consideration at the scaling stage, faster turnaround time. I know I want to inspect this piece of translation. How little can I make the delay between my decision to look at something and getting an extra one data point in return? That's the key question. How quickly you can actually run through this measurement cycle and add more data points in your database for your analysis. Of course, the shorter, the better. And there are some tricks and tactics that can be used here in order to mitigate the delay and the supply chain structure and so on and so forth. Ultimately, the two key goals for the scaling stage: get as much data as we can while still staying on budget, of course, more higher quantity of data, but also make sure that we're gathering data in the cleanest possible way to make sure that it's consistent with itself. And when we're comparing, different types of fruit in our program, there's actually apples and apples instead of apples and oranges, for instance, or mango, right? So that's the quality of your data. And by the way, Excel is not a good solution for ensuring great quality of data, nor, of course, for faster turnaround, and especially not for lower overheads. So yeah, it's kind of problematic. The way to go is usually automation and integration, right? Connecting everything to run as smoothly as possible, getting Excel completely out of the picture so that you can actually get to the third stage of your linguistic quality program. Late stage. Question for you first. Before we go to late stage, let me know if any of you are looking at scaling already, which of the four things I've described bugs you the most? What's the biggest hurdle you're facing when trying to scale an existing program? So going from just defining the shape, what you will do, planning, strategizing and stuff, to executing repeatedly. If there's a specific item like from those ones or maybe other stuff, let me know. Last one. Oh, I actually have a typo here. I'll need to fix that before I send the slides to you. It's not mid-stage, of course, it's late stage. So once you've started executing, once the data starts flowing as efficiently as possible and the data is as clean as possible, this is what you want to be doing. You actually want to start deriving benefits from your linguistic quality program, which is pretty much hard work, right? But this is all the previous steps. They are leading us to this. In order to benefit from a linguistic quality program, you need to kind of keep working on it. Getting data in is just the first step, but what you need to be busy with is a regular analysis of the data. It's fun to measure quality and argue about how good or bad it is, but if you don't analyze the data points you've been collecting, it's all for nothing. You still don't understand anything at all, even though you might be giving feedback. Root causes. Why did things go wrong in this translation? Usually it's about going wrong, right? Very few teams analyze root causes for great translations. This might be a practice we need to see more of, to be honest. So finding out the reason for why the quality is not where you want it to be and figuring out how to actually fix it. This is the dreaded CAPA thing. Any of you know what CAPA actually is? Type into the chat window if you can. What does CAPA stand for? C-A-P-A. Anybody knows? Yeah, Monica. I definitely am not surprised that you know. Perfect. Alona, great job. Yeah, so CAPA is corrective action, preventive action. Very simply put, when you find a problem, you need to figure out one or maybe two things. A, how do you fix the problem right now? That's corrective action. And B, how do you prevent the problem from reoccurring in the future, right? So that's CAPA for you. And ultimately, you do all of those processes repeatedly in order to slowly, bit by bit, actually get the quality of your various translations to the point where you need them to be, but not further than that, by the way. Having too much quality is another type of problem. So yeah, these are the 4 typical considerations that we at ContentQual have seen working with late-stage linguistic quality programs at localization departments and localization teams. I'm wrapping up now. We're pretty much done. I will summarize briefly what we went through today. We looked at why the hell teams are interested in linguistic quality all of a sudden, and thought about the recent Amazon scenario, which is a great example of what not to do, like how to use quality to get transparency, to manage downwards, to manage upwards. We looked at no less than 7 distinct reasons or signs that you might need a linguistic quality program in your organization, or you might need to improve it further because it's not where it is supposed to be. And finally, we looked at some high-level strategies for the 3 stages of your quality program: early, mid-stage, and late. So shaping stage, scaling stage, and benefiting stage, and how to go about, preventing or fixing some of the typical problems. We are now open for Q&A. If you're not happy with how your current program is laid down, you need some support in order to define the next steps. Maybe you think to start your own program, not quite sure where to start. Please drop me a note. You can respond to the emails where we'll send you the slides and the recording after the webinar. And we'll also send a free ebook, by the way, probably early next week to give you a bit more insight. Just reply to my email, and we can definitely schedule a free call to talk about your specific situation in detail. And I will be happy to provide advice and insights on what I might do in this stage. And you can also do this through our website as well. No obligations and no strings attached. Thank you very much. And we're open to questions. Please type them into the chat window or into the Q&A window. I think at this stage we can do both. Valeria says that it was very interesting. I'm glad to hear that. Any questions? Any thoughts? You can ask me about your program if you want, about the things that bug you, if you want, or any generic ideas. Just riff on what I was saying before. How would you measure the quality if there are no metrics involved? Asks Sanda. That's a funny, tricky question. I would probably go philosophical on this one and ask a counter question. But can we say we're measuring something if there are no metrics? Like, can we pretend that we measure if there's no way to measure? I'm not quite sure about the answer, but like I want to give something useful. Like I said, we were having this discussion with Google just before this webinar, and we talked about like a next type or next level of metrics that can sometimes be used in quality programs under quite specific circumstances to provide more insights. We talked about linguistic quality. It's great because we can actually measure this ourselves, right? Being inside the localization process before we publish the content for the rest of the world, for the readers, for the buyers, for the players to see. But we can also look at what happens when we actually publish the content, when we put online the documents, when we launch a campaign, when we publish our localized app, and so on and so forth. We can measure the outcome of localization in whatever business metrics make sense, conversion metrics, or I don't know, product metrics or business metrics like sales. It really depends on what content we're talking about, but you can gather performance metrics, at least in digital channels. Of course, they are the ultimate pinnacle of measuring quality without measuring quality, so to speak. But there's a bit of a challenge with performance-related metrics. They take a very long time to gather, and in some cases, you might not have enough of them. And in some cases, you might not have them at all. Imagine if you're not distributing your content digitally, what would you do? It's really difficult to get performance metrics. Customer feedback is the only proxy we can rely on, right? But B, they come in, well, really late, but B, they are not self-explanatory. They don't give us the reasons for why things are wrong. They don't give you enough detail, enough granularity to start answering, what do I have to change in my localization program in order to prevent this issue? And this is, again, where we're usually back to square one. We need to gather metrics on linguistic quality, try to see if they correlate with the outcomes, and see what we can change in our localization production process in order to improve the outcome several months down the road. Tricky stuff. Be happy to talk more about it. We can probably do like a whole webinar or a panel discussion about it later on with a few other smart people if you're interested. If you want to do that, let me know. We can definitely dive deeper into that. Any other questions or just comments or thoughts or observations from your own experience with linguistic quality in your organizations, current ones, previous ones? Okay, just a reminder that you will get the recording of the session as well. And we'll also send you the slide deck with all the 7 signs and some of the strategic questions to answer later on. In the meantime, let me know if there's more things you want to talk about. Except Amazon. All right. Looks like there are no more questions. And that's great. If you have anything popping up in your mind, please feel free to reach me at this email, kirill@contentquo.com. I will personally respond to all the questions you ask, or just reach me through LinkedIn or through our website, and we can definitely continue the conversations and see how we can provide you more specific and targeted advice for your situation. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to host this webinar today for you. Please stay tuned for the recording tomorrow and the ebook early next week. And we'll definitely continue talking about quality management and localization programs later on. Stay tuned for further webinar announcements. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you very much for coming today. I'm Kirill Soloviev with Content Quo, and we'll be in touch. Bye-bye.